Okay, good evening and welcome everybody to the Children and Young People's Scrutiny Commission. I am Councillor Margaret Gordon, Vice Chair of the CYP Scrutiny Commission. Unfortunately, our Chair, Councillor Conway, isn't able to be with us this evening and sends her apologies. So I'm going to initially assume the chair role for the meeting. Just to remind everybody, this is a formal meeting of Hackney Council and all the usual constitutional requirements of council meetings apply. Should be noted that this meeting is being held as a hybrid meeting with members physically present here in the Town Hall and others connecting virtually. Officers attending the meeting are also connecting virtually, as well as members of the public. Can I remind members and officers, whether you are present here in the Town Hall or present connecting virtually, this meeting continues to be held in public and is being broadcast live via the internet. The rights of the press and public to record and film the meeting continue to apply, and media representatives may be in attendance or viewing the live stream. In terms of housekeeping and operability, can you note the following? Unless you are speaking, please keep your microphone muted. If you'd like to speak, please raise your either real or virtual hand to get the attention of the chair. Please keep your camera on if you're joining remotely, as this helps the chair to identify who would like to speak. I'd also like to welcome two young people who are attending this evening from Hackney Youth Parliament, Goldine and Sudana. So thank you very much for attending. Your contribution is really welcomed. Thank you for your patience with the introductions. We'll now start the meeting. So I'm going on to agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I've got apologies for absence from Councillor Anna Lynch and Councillor Sophie Conway. And two members of the Commission are connecting virtually this evening. So welcome Salma Kansara and Stephen Olaleri. So agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest? Yeah, Councillor Sizer? Yeah.
Trustee for Ivy Street Family Centre and parent of a SEN child, looking specifically at secondary schools. So,
thank you. Councillor Selman?
The white rather than the green, sorry. In relation to item 6, just to note that in my previous cabinet role, because I was involved in decision-making responsibility in relation to the early help review, I will not be participating in that item. In addition, in relation to the early years strategy, just to note that I'm the mother of a early years child, and then finally also just to note that until recently I was the governor of a school which had an ARP, but not within this borough. So I don't think it presents a conflict, but just noting it for the avoidance of doubt and for completeness.
Thanks very much, Councillor Selman. Joe, I think.
I'm a governor of Sir Thomas Savney Primary School, and I'm also the parent of a child with additional needs.
Okay. Shabnam?
Parent governor of Benthall Primary School, and also a parent with a child with SEND.
Okay, thanks very much. And I think virtually we've got Councillor Peters.
So I'm a governor of the Garden School in Hackney.
Thank you very much. I'm also going to declare an interest in that I've been, in terms of agenda items, in relation to the early years strategy, agenda items 4, and is it agenda item 6 in relation to the early help review, in that I've been involved in a backbench working group that's referenced in the papers, although I haven't been involved in a decision-making capacity. But I'm going to hand over to a different member to take the chair for those items, just to fully preserve the independent function of scrutiny. I'm also a parent of a child with special educational needs. So I'm now going to hand over to the scrutiny officer to elect a new chair for those items, and I will return for the final item. Thank you.
Good evening. So just for item 4, could we like to take nominations for a new chair, please? Do we have any nominations? For item 4, do we take nominations for the chair?
To nominate myself. Yeah, so for I think potentially I think for item 4, I'm happy to be nominated in relation to item 4. Though as discussed earlier, I won't be able to be nominated in relation to item 6, for which members may wish to nominate Councillor Hanson for item 6.
I'm happy to be nominated for item 6, Chair, if that's helpful.
Can we confirm those nominations for a second? Okay, thank you.
So I'm now going to formally hand over to Councillor Caroline Selman, who will chair the next item.
Thank you, Chair. So as members of the Commission will recall, at the last meeting of this Commission on the 6th of October, we heard from about the plans for the development of an early years strategy, and at that meeting had the opportunity to question officers on the proposals to reconfigure local children's centres. As I think most people here are aware, there's currently a public consultation in progress, which is running through until November 2021. And the Commission, as part of our scrutiny role, will formally contribute to that consultation. As you would hope, we are particularly keen as part of formulating our response to that consultation to hear from parent representatives from the 2 children's centres which have been proposed for closure. And they've been invited here today to attend and present their views on what the impact of the planned closures will have on children and their families, the planned mitigations and support that, that officers are proposing to put in place to help parents move to alternative services, and the consultation and engagement strategy. Just to be clear about what we can and can't do today, as a Scrutiny Commission, we are not a decision-making body, but we do have a role in scrutinising it, and as I mentioned before, we will have an opportunity in order to submit our response in relation to that. So the purpose of this evening is to inform the response that we make to that consultation. I'd therefore like to welcome to the meeting representatives from Fernbank and Hillside Children's Centres, Lizzie Kenyon, Nick Yates and Natalie Aguilera. I'll draw members' attention to the fact that they have also prepared a joint written submission, and that is included in the agenda and the reports pack. We have about 30 minutes for this item, so I'd like to ask the parent representatives to present for 10 to 15 minutes, and we will then have 15 minutes or so for questions from members of the Commission. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to the parent representatives. If you would like to present, that would be great.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to start out. My name's Natalie Aguilera, and I have a 2-year-old at Fernbank and a 7-month-old who has a place starting in March, or so I thought. Just want to say quickly, thank you so much for the opportunity to allow us to speak here. We really, really appreciate it. So I'm going to talk about the process so far and just the broader impact the closures are going to have in terms of provision across Hackney. Lizzie Kenyon is then going to talk in detail about the consultation process and our issues with it. And then Nick Yates is going to finish by talking about the impact on children and families and the messaging we've received about the plans to support us to find alternative provision. So just in summary, really, the closure of Fernbank and Hillside is going to mean a loss of 20% of subsidised childcare across Hackney, with a whopping 26% reduction in places for under 2s to just 93 places across the entire borough. This is a huge reduction in affordable care. It's going to have a significant impact on children and families using the nursery provision, but of course also the hundreds of children and carers using the drop-in sessions, which include SEND support. And of course, there are 35 staff that are also facing redundancy, almost all of them women. Given the enormous impact these closures will have, we as parents in the local community would expect to see a really thorough process in the presentation of this new strategy, but we've been really alarmed by what's happened so far and the way that key information has been buried in our view. So Cabinet voted through the early years strategy on the evening of Monday the 13th of September. The strategy document that's voted through had absolutely no mention whatsoever about the proposed closures, just loose wording around reconfiguration. However, details of the strategy and the closures were published in Hackney Today that morning before the vote even happened. Staff weren't informed about the redundancies until more than 24 hours after publication in the paper. So some of them were reading about their possible redundancy in the newspaper. The consultation process then started 2 days later, on the 15th of September, with both the early year strategy and the proposed closures lumped together in the same consultation. We don't understand why the proposed closures weren't mentioned in the strategy that was voted on if it had been decided so far in advance that these closures were going to be, proposed. We don't feel that it makes any sense for Cabinet to approve a proposed strategy after publication in the paper, but before a public consultation. Surely the council should solicit feedback from those residents that are going to be affected before agreeing and voting on such a decision. This has come completely out of the blue for us. Additionally, the earlier strategy and the nursery closures have been presented as if they're mutually exclusive, and they're not. As you all know, the strategy is a standard process by which the council reviews policy, but then the closure of the children's centres seems to have to do with the overall budget of the council and what it's considering for the upcoming financial year. And these are two issues that we feel should be treated differently and under separate consultations. Lizzie's going to go into more detail about it, but as it stands, there's only one question in the entire survey about the closures, and it's just a multiple choice question. All you can do is agree or disagree, which just doesn't feel like sufficient feedback on which the council will be able to conclude a community's views. An email has since been added, but that's still not mentioned on the web page, and it was added weeks into the consultation process. We feel that Hackney residents should have a full opportunity to give feedback properly on a decision that's going to have such a significant impact on children, parents and staff. Additionally, statements have been made by officers that have given us no confidence that other options have been explored. We've heard nothing to suggest that there's been any kind of a robust process to get to this point. We've been told by Donna Thomas at the Fernbank parents meeting there was no plan B, but surely if options have been thoroughly explored, there should be something, right? This makes us really nervous that these closures are just a done deal. We've asked to see evidence and data used in the rationale for these closures, but it's just not been forthcoming. In fact, I've gone so far as to make a request for all recorded information on the subject of the proposed closures and any data that was used to make this decision under the Freedom of Information Act. And I should have received that information by the 28th of October, and it's still not arrived. I've just heard nothing. So all in all, this process has felt rushed, and in all honesty, it's felt dishonest. Finally, I just want to add that as
Natalie,
I'm going to finish off. Sorry, yeah.
sorry, apologies. I think there's some issues with the internet connection.
Okay.
Yeah, so it can sometimes help if you switch the camera off, so that we just have your microphone. That can sometimes help.
Sorry, the sound is dropping in and out, and I'm missing.
Sorry, I don't think it's Natalie. I think it's us in the chamber, because everyone else can hear.
Is it a general issue?
Everyone else can hear us, what Natalie is saying, without any interruptions. I think it's just there's a Wi-Fi issue going on in the chamber.
So is this likely to apply to all speakers speaking remotely?
Everyone else will hear this.
Right.
We might just keep getting this interruption. So just depending on the.
So I know that that's unfortunate, but we might just have to progress with how we are going. And if members have missed stuff, I would note that this is recorded, isn't it?
Yes,
afterwards.
it is recorded.
So I know it's suboptimal, but if people would also like to go back to watch what we've done before, they should hopefully be able to see the full submission.
Apologies.
In the meantime, I think we'll have to persevere. Apologies, Natalie.
Okay.
I will let you return to what you were saying. Thank you.
Sorry, I thought you were going to say that's enough. Apologies. Right, so just finishing off really. So I think just the only last thing I wanted to add, that I think generally parents are concerned about the whole process for decision making going forward as it's been described to us. So we've been told that despite the new strategy and the closures having an impact on constituents borough-wide, the full council is not going to be involved in voting on these closures. And as far as we understand, the final decision is going to sit with unelected senior officers in the council and the cabinet, which is selected by the mayor, who, from speaking to him last week, is telling us that these closures basically need to happen. And this feels to me and to us like where, like, doesn't feel like a democratic process, you know, where's the accountability? So I'm going to leave it there and pass on to Lizzie now to speak next. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Can I just suggest, if my understanding is for Nick or Lizzie to say something in addition, is that what you were suggesting?
Yeah.
That's fine, but can I just request that if we could perhaps keep it brief, that would be ideal, just so we can make sure we leave enough time for members' questions. Thanks very much. Either Nick or Lizzie, if you'd be happy to contribute now.
It's going to be me next. So thanks everyone. I am Lizzie and I have a 3-year-old at Hillside and a baby who I was hoping would be able to join him at Hillside next year. So just to build a little bit on what Natalie said, but very briefly, we have identified as parents a number of issues with the data that's been put forward by the council as a rationale for closures. I think generally there's been just a real lack of information, as Natalie mentioned. We've had to dig quite deep to actually get hold of information that's helped us understand, you know, where the council's thinking or how the council's thinking has got to the point it has. So a really good example of that, just to give you an example, is the use throughout communications of things like vacancy rates as a rationale for closures. We know that the council's own childcare sufficiency assessment highlights that vacancy rates only offer a snapshot in time of use and that they change rapidly. And we've asked numerous questions about these rates and which rates are referenced and what that really means. And we've yet to receive full answers about that. But the point is that the lack of this information really doesn't help the reader or parents or residents engaging in the process to understand what the use of that rate really means as a reason for proposing closures. And there are numerous other examples I could give. You know, there's research or the views of parents are referenced as being used for the development of these strategies. And again, there's no reference to exactly what research was undertaken with parents, when it was undertaken, its fit for purposeness in terms of use, given it was carried out, you know, during the pandemic. Some of the questions have been answered subsequently in an FAQ document that was issued by the council on the 20th of October. But as Natalie mentioned, this is quite a significant way into this already very short process. And you know, anyone answering the consultation to date would not have had that information available to them. Just to mention as well, we feel that, as Natalie has said, the process itself is deeply problematic. I just want to mention one example of this, which this combining together of the early years strategy and proposed closures. We see statements in the consultation documents that talk about reprovisioning of children's centres to make savings so that we can target resources to most vulnerable and disadvantaged children. Well, we know that vulnerable and disadvantaged children are going to be affected by these closures. In fact, the council's own equality impact assessment stated that planned reduction would impact on working families and particularly lower income families, and vulnerable children may also be adversely affected by changes. So it's this kind of presentation of data in the consultation that we think is really problematic. If you see that single question in the survey, you know, there's a small number of bullet points provided to give context to the question, but actually they're highly selective. They could arguably be leading, you know, someone to say, yeah, this is a good idea. It talks about the fact that 5 centres are all placed conveniently within walking distance of each other, when actually those centres are not like for like. We know that families are accessing that provision from well outside of the immediate area. So to simply present these kind of statements as true is misleading, and we think is leading people potentially to answering questions in a way they might not if they were being fully informed and fully updated on exactly the information and the impacts that these proposals will have. I'll stop because I think Nick's going to talk about some of the actual impacts on families. And just to say, this process for us has been really stressful. We are, you know, some of us are parents at home on maternity leave, you know, working parents. We've been scrabbling around trying to find information, scrabbling around trying to communicate with each other. This process is only 8.5 weeks long. You know, it's 5 weeks shorter than the parking consultation process, which is going on at the moment. You know, all of this is making our ability to engage with it extremely challenging. So just to make that final point, and Nick, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Caroline, can you just clarify how much we have left of our 15 minutes?
You have 5 minutes. Well, yeah, 4 to 5 minutes.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact of the proposed closures. I'll talk a little bit about the short-term impact, some logistics, sorry, the short-term impact and the long-term impact. Since we heard about the closures, we've set up WhatsApp groups and parents groups to try and speak to other parents to find out about the impact of these closures at Hillside and Fernbank. And we've asked parents to tell us what Fernbank means to them and how important it means to us. Just kind of touch on Lizzie's point, the three of us don't necessarily look like the community that Fernbank and Hillside serves. We kind of look like the people that are privileged and lucky enough to have some time to give to these meetings and to do the research behind it, but we have been speaking to the broader community around the two centres. First, in terms of logistics, both Fernbank and Hillside offer childcare from 7:45 to 5:45 every weekday from children to 3 months to 4 years old. And these hours are absolutely crucial to working parents. If you go to a morning drop-off at either centre, you'll regularly see parents literally running from the door in order to get to work on time. And private nurseries often don't offer these shorter hours, and the working parents we've spoken to have told us these hours are really crucial, alongside the additional drop-in activities that both centres provide. To touch on the geography point as well, the actual location of the centre is a really sensitive issue for working parents. The location is really important to enable both parents to be able to drop off. A small move, if I think about my own case with myself and my wife, if the centre was to move even just 5 minutes in one direction, that would make it impossible for my wife to do drop off in the morning. Equally, 5 minutes the other way would make it impossible for me to do drop off in the morning. In terms of the short-term impact of this closure, we've spoken to a lot of parents, as I've said, and the word that keep coming up time and time again are love and care. If you speak to parents who have children at these centres, these words just come up again and again and again. The sort of passion and commitment that staff at these centres show is just incredible. And you might hear as in us talking, or if you hear staff speaking, that people get very emotional about it because it is such a fantastic place for our children to attend. You hear parents talk about their children coming home and playing nursery at home, talking about the friends that they've made there, asking when they can go back to nursery again. It's centres just absolutely full of love and care for the children within that, and that comes from the staff and the sort of long-term experience that they have. The council, in terms of short-term impact, the council have offered no guarantee in terms of the provision that will be provided for the students there, the children there, sorry. We know as parents that other centres in the area have sometimes up to 2 years waiting lists. And the council have talked about offering alternatives like childminders or students or pupils having to move into private provision. But these aren't suitable for all parents, even if they could afford them. Finally, just to talk about the long-term impact, and I think this is probably the most worrying feature of it. So currently there's 100 pupils in Fernbank and roughly the same at Hillside. But we know year on year, if these centres close, this is going to affect thousands of families who are going to be unable to access affordable childcare. Lots of parents have talked about how they chose children's centres because they wanted their children to be educated and playing with a group of children that reflect the diversity of Hackney. And we know that our private nurseries in the borough are very homogenous. They only have high-income families, high-income children in there. So we're really seeing that the sort of the long-term impact is that we're going to have further division and further kind of separation between children. And yeah, I think that's the kind of the point that I wanted to end on, that Hackney Council really needs to make a decision about how it wants its young people to be educated. Does it want young people to be mixing together in rooms that really reflect the diversity of Hackney? Or does it want to move away to separate provision and perhaps no provision for pupils and children from low-income backgrounds? So we really welcome questions and we'll do our best to answer them.
Thanks, Nick, and also thanks to Lizzie and Natalie as well. I'm now going to open up the floor to members for any questions that they have, if members would like to raise their hands either virtually or in person. So one question I would like to ask, if that's okay, is you spoke about this bit in the written statement that you provided. One of the things that's been put forward in terms of the consultation document is about the proximity of other children's centres, and I just wondered if one of you would be happy to sort of talk to that a bit more, whether you do or don't think that that is something that mitigates the concerns. Thank you.
I'm happy to say that as a first start. So when we applied for our place for our daughter, we applied to 10 local children's centres. Fernbank was the only centre that was able to offer her a place. Another centre got in touch with us when she was 2 years old, and they finally had a place for her. So we're very nervous about the idea that there might be that there will even be space for her in other centres in the local area.
Do you want to add to that, Natalie?
No, Lizzie, you do it, because we've talked about this before.
So I think the other point to mention here, as I understand it, and I actually travel in from the northwest of the borough to Hillside, so already travel what would be a 30-minute walk, but we do it by bike. Other centres within the 5 that have been referenced to target their services very specific towards communities of interest, and they're well used in the way that the other centres are, which is absolutely right. But they are presented as though these are exactly like for like settings, and people could easily just access services across the 5 settings, as you know, just go from one to the other. That's not quite what we understand is available in these other settings. So for me, it's a problematic. It's problematic linking them together as though they're 5 equal centres, exactly the same. You could just walk from one to the other and get exactly the same services. That's just not the case.
Thanks, Lizzie. Can I just check that I'm not missing any members' hands remotely? Okay, great. So, Katie, if you would like to, Councillor Hanson, if you would like to ask a question.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the 2 people who presented. I'm afraid the sound quality was fairly ropey, so we missed bits of what you said. So apologies if you've covered what I'm about to ask. And I did hear reference to vacancy rates, which obviously is something that's been included in the consultation. I appreciate the point that was made that vacancy rates can vary, but we were given to understand that there was quite a substantial vacancy rate at both these children's centres. I wondered if, as parents, you had any thoughts as to why that might be the case, and why some parents actually might prefer, it would appear, to send their children to other settings rather than maintained and subsidised nurseries, because that doesn't seem obvious to me. Are the hours shorter, or is there something else that makes council maintained nurseries less attractive to some parents than private provision?
Let's be clear that the 23% vacancy rate is across all of nursery provision, private and maintained. So, and it's also was just a snapshot taken mid-pandemic. We still don't know exactly when. We do know that actually vacancy rates, for example, at Fernbank, it was at 93% in July. Hannah Addy, the head of Fernbank, actually confirmed that at a parents' meeting, and that there's been no issues with vacancy rates whatsoever at Fernbank over the last few years up until COVID, basically. Also, it's worth mentioning that the vacancy rates that have been taken now, the council told both centres that they had to close their admissions lists and not allowed, and have been told that they can't bring any more children into the centre. So basically, lots of children left in September to go to school, well, earlier, I guess, and they haven't been able to bring any further children into the centre. But in terms of why we might think that there was any vacancy at any, subsidised nursery, it could only be because, they're just not advertised very well at all. So I think a lot of parents just don't know that they are there. There is no question why no one has ever said there is too much affordable childcare out there. If there's any space that's not been taken, I'm absolutely certain it's because there's no communication across centres. If you call up a centre, they won't say to you, oh, you should go to this centre or that centre. I know there's vacancy rates there. And yet the Family Information Service collect vacancy rates every month. It would be so easy for them to circulate it, and for nurseries to say, oh, we've got a 2-year waiting list here at Combatant, but I know that, you know, at Old Hill there are spaces for under 2s, for example. There's no advertising on, you know, I think Lizzie looked back over on Twitter, the last time that the Family Information Service tweeted about any vacancy was in 2013. I honestly, there is no issue, you know, as Nick was saying, these are they run all year long, they run full-time hours, and they run affordable care. So in my mind, they, you know, like I say, there should be absolutely no vacancy rate, and it's not anything to do with provision, it's purely to do with visibility.
Thank you, Natalie. Councillor Hanson, sound notwithstanding, did that answer your question, or do you have any follow-up? It's difficult without the sound. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, firstly, thank you so much for presenting and taking the time this evening to speak to us. It's really appreciated. I just wanted to ask a little bit about the actual documents that gave the information and along every step of the way with the consultation process. How clear you found them, how accessible they were to people, and also to a range of people. It's great that you're here representing the community, but do you feel that the consultation documents were accessible on every level for a range of people? And if not, why not?
I can probably talk a little bit to that. So, I mean, I actually marked out some time to read the documents because I thought, right, this is going to be a chunky thing to get into. And the consultation document itself was just 2 sides of A4 as a leaflet. And I think a quarter of that was a map. So there was really very little information available in the actual consultation document. And then, of course, there was the early years strategy, which is it's a high level strategic document. And I understand the need for that to be in easy to read English and accessible, but there was nothing that, as far as I could tell, that sat behind that enabled me to go, okay, I understand the high level detail, now I want to understand what sits behind it, references off, for example, to the childcare sufficiency assessment, so I could say, okay, I can understand what the provision looks like in Hackney. All of that was missing. We've had to dig really deep and research to find that information, and my personal opinion would be, if you're running a meaningful consultation, people need that information. They need clear data, and it might just be taken with references so that people can go off and look at more information if they need it. They need that in order to answer questions in a meaningful way. Without that, you're just guessing at what your view is on things. So but in terms of your broader question, the information that was made available was in plain English and all of that, and parents were provided with a single meeting date to go along and attend and hear from officers about the plans and ask questions, and that was useful. But ultimately, one single meeting. We don't know if the minutes for those meetings are going to be made available to parents that weren't able to attend those sessions, and it is fair to say that a subsequent public meeting has been arranged for, I think, the 9th of November, but again, that was promoted halfway through the process. It's 1 week before the end of the consultation itself, so it feels like that may have been done in response to some of the concerns that were being raised by parents about how they could get more information.
Nick, did you want to add something to that?
Just a short point that I think is worth mentioning is that parents' meeting that Lizzie mentioned, lots of parents were able to attend that because the staff at Fernbank agreed to work later to look after our children whilst we were able to attend that meeting. And I think that sort of commitment to the centre and commitment to the children just really needs worth mentioning. So I just wanted to kind of raise that point.
I also want to say that actually a parent did write who wasn't able to attend the parents' meeting to ask for the minutes, and were told that there were no minutes, even though we were also told that our feedback was being captured. Apparently we need to get the captured information from the consultation team, but we've not been able to do that. So we don't even know, basically, and there's not been another parents' meeting scheduled, and so those who didn't make it just didn't get a chance to feed in.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I've noticed it. Councillor Peters.
Hi, thank you very much for coming along this evening. And it is very helpful, I think, for the Commission to hear your first-hand experiences of these centres. I mean, the consultation talks about some context in terms of the financial challenges facing the council after a decade of government austerity imposed on local government. Is that something that you have sympathy with, and do you a lot of what you've said this evening has been about a consultation process that appears to, or you're telling us is flawed. Would a better consultation process, are you saying that that would perhaps lead to a different substantive result?
I think thanks for your question. I think in terms of the sympathy, I mean, yeah, we understand. You know, we're speaking to Labour councillors. We heard you all speak at the start about, you know, as a group of as parents of SND people. We know that you're sympathetic to the cause. What really worries us is we're not seeing, this is how many children are in Hackney this year. This is how many children there are going to be in Hackney this year. Therefore, we need to cut this number of places. Every time we get into details, we're hearing very vague, very unclear statements about provision, and that makes us feel like this isn't about, you know, cutting efficiency so that you can spend more money somewhere else, or you know, stopping waste so you can spend it somewhere else. It feels like it's being driven for some other reason, because we just don't have the data. We know that there are 6,000 births every year in Homerton, and that is a stable rate. And so and exactly as Natalie has said, nobody is saying there is too much affordable childcare. That's not a sentence that you hear anywhere. And it seems like that's what this consultation is arguing, that there is too much affordable childcare in Hackney. And that's laughable. That is laughable for a council to be suggesting that. And I think the other point is, part of our role as parents is, it's not our job to do the finances and to work out how to fund childcare. It's to speak on behalf of a very valuable service that is making a real difference in the community. And so, you know, we're happy to look at numbers, and we're happy to look at different funding options if they're presented to us. But at the moment, all we're being told is that this centre is going to close, and so we have to speak up and say what the impact of that's going to be.
Thank you, Nick. Councillor Peters, does that answer your question?
So I think it does. I think it does, and I think what we're hearing here is that, and that is a very valuable advocacy role that you're playing. And as I said, I think it is very helpful for us. But what I'm hearing is that you do consider the consultation process to be flawed, and if there were those the actual numbers and the case were to be made that these changes need to be made because of cost pressures, then you may be more sympathetic to that fuller conversation and that broader, richer conversation actually happening.
I think, yeah, that's valid. I think I'd want to come back to something that we've mentioned before, is the experience of parents is putting their child down on a waiting list for 10 different centres and getting one place, and then 2 years later being told that there's too many places in the borough. That doesn't connect, that doesn't make sense. And so that's a big question that we have about the whole process.
Thank you. Councillor Young, did you have your hand up? Can I just ask as well, Councillor Young, and also if people are responding, if we could keep it as concise as possible, just so we stick to time. Thank you very much.
Okay, my question moves away from the closure of these centres, so apologies if people still have questions about that. I just wanted to ask if any of you have sort of had any thoughts about the rest of the early years strategy and the other proposals in it. For example, the family hubs, specialist early years centres, and so on. So there are other proposals that just be really interesting, because you've spent some time as parents looking at this strategy. It'd be good to hear your views on the rest of it, if you have any.
I'm happy to, Natalie, did you want to speak? I'm happy to speak. I think one thing that is, and Lizzie touched on this, is one thing that seems strange about the hubs is the hubs seem to be offering ad hoc or informal, more kind of short-term offers compared to these children's centres which offer this 7:45 to 5:45 care. My child doesn't have additional needs, so it's not something I have a lot of experience of. But it doesn't seem to be, the hubs don't seem to be replacing what the children's centres do. They seem to be offering something completely different. And so it seems odd that these two things are being dealt with together. But it's not an area I have a lot of expertise on, so I will, yeah.
Thank you, Nick. Lizzie or Natalie, did you want to add anything to that?
I guess all I would say is that I'm not sure there's really enough information presented. Again, you know, data, how have these hubs worked in other places that could possibly allow a layperson to really have a strong opinion on them. I mean, I personally feel that hubs for a full 0 to 19 year olds feels like a lot under one roof, and that actually maybe young, you know, parents with young children require really specific provision, and that this is just like, you know, sure start light really, and that actually yeah, it just feels like a lot. Feels like a lot, and to be under one roof. So, you know, what the youth side as well, with the young families and everything. So I guess that's all I would say really, is that I don't feel like there's enough information to really make a proper have a proper opinion on it. But also to me it feels like, yeah, a lot under one roof, and that that really there's a reason why there are these special places for under fives. Yeah.
Many thanks, Natalie, and thanks to all for taking the time to come and speak to us tonight. It's been really useful, and it will be very useful in helping to shape the response that we submit. Just as background for members that are here, just to note that the Group Director has been formally asked to outline what the next steps are post-consultation, including the outcomes and reporting from the consultation, and the decision-making approach that we take based on the consultation, which should be, I think, being reported back to us as a Commission. I just want to note to parents that we understand how important front-facing services, such as local children's services, are. As we've heard tonight, how anxious parents are about the proposed changes. We will be developing our response to the consultation, and we'll be publishing that as part of a future agenda, so that will be available publicly for people to read. I'm just going to look to Martin to just check I've not missed anything, there's nothing else I should be covering.
No, I think Jackie might just want to respond to that thing then.
Excellent, that's great. So Jackie, would you like to respond? I think it's particularly in relation to the point about next steps of post-consultation. That would be brilliant.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the next steps, as we said, the consultation closes on the 16th of November. A report of the findings will be pulled together and shared with myself and my senior leadership team, and we'll take a paper to Cabinet with outlining some proposals that we'll ask Cabinet to make decisions on, and the Cabinet will be in December.
Can I ask a final question? Is that okay?
If we could keep it extremely brief, that would be great.
It is
Sorry,
literally just, will we see the consultation report? Will we see anything?
Jackie, are you able to respond briefly to that?
It's a paper that will be going to Cabinet. So in terms of when and how it will be shared, I'm very new to Hackney, so I will have to take some advice on that, and we can get back to you.
Again, it's just the issue of
just to say,
transparency.
Cabinet papers are normally non-confidential, so it would be published in advance of the Cabinet meeting, presumably, Chair, if it's a report to Cabinet.
Jackie, are you? So I think you froze slightly. I don't know if you heard Councillor Hanson's contribution there, but she was noting that obviously in terms of any Cabinet member, the Cabinet member decision itself and any of the supporting information that will be used to inform that Cabinet decision will, as a minimum, be in the public.
Yeah.
Is my understanding. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Is that right?
Do you want to hand over to Councillor Hanson for the next item?
If we move over to the next item, and for that item, we'll be passing the chair over, slightly confusingly, to Councillor Hanson. Many thanks.
Thank you. So we are taking these items out of order for the benefit of people not in the room. So now we're going on to the early help review. So a review of Hackney Council's early help services has been ongoing since 2019, encompassing services provided through Young Hackney, Family Support Service and Early Years and Children's Centres. We've been invited to review reports which set out the aims and principles underpinning this review, as well as the outcomes and priorities and the possible implications for local services. So I'm going to ask officers, including Jackie, who's just been speaking, to present the key issues from the reports, and then we can have time for questions. So officers, over to you, please.
Sorry about that, was on mute. So thank you, Chair. I'm going to introduce the item, and Joshua Nesbitt is the officer who's done the majority of the work on this, so he will take us through the detail of the paper, and we will respond to any questions together. So as you will be aware, the early help review was started in 2019, and it was put on hold for several months during the pandemic, and we have picked it up during the pandemic and arrived at a set of issues that we want to address very quickly in terms of how our in-house early help review is managed. So I'm going to ask Joshua to take you through the context of how we've arrived at this and what the immediate steps are, what the intermediate steps are, and what our long-term ambition is for this particular piece of work. Joshua.
Thank you, Jackie, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for having us. So I'll talk to item 6 and particularly provide an overview of paper 6B, which will then link in and make reference to paper 6C and paper 6D as the bundle provided. So as Jackie kind of introduced there, just a bit of background on early help. Early help refers to that non-statutory support that's provided to a child, young person or family where there are indicators that they're at risk of poor outcomes and need some additional help to achieve a good level.
Joshua, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but if you could slow down a little, we might be able to hear you better in the room, because the sound quality isn't great for us, I'm afraid.
Of course, apologies.
Thank you, that's better. If you just reduce your speed, we'll have more chance of catching you.
Of course, apologies. So as I was saying, the early help is referring to that non-statutory support that is provided to a young person, to a child, and to their family, where there are indicators of poor outcomes and need some additional support to achieve a good level of well-being. And this paper provided, and the papers provided, outline the process for Hackney's review into its internal early help services, what the review has learned, and what the outcomes are that we want to take forward at some pace. So as Jackie mentioned, the review was initiated in 2019 and paused for a period of approximately 6 months in 2020 due to the impact of the pandemic on services. And the review in its initiation had 3 primary drivers: to give officers and members that confidence that Hackney's early help model was still fit for purpose, and it wasn't driven by perceived failings, and indeed the quality of Hackney's early help services was recognised by Ofsted in November 2019 as well developed and effective. But this was more an opportunity to look collectively at the early help services we offered and to ensure that the offer was still matched the needs of children, young people and their families in Hackney. And this kind of links to recognition that the developments in the social, political and economic context in Hackney have changed since both services were established and since a wholesale review as this has been completed. And then finally, this review wasn't driven by a need to make savings at all, but rather to ensure that the early help model is financially sustainable, is making effective use of our resources, and of course, because of the impact of COVID, that's only become more accentuated. In terms of the scope of the review has been focused on the internal early help provided by early years and children's centres, and so the early help aspect of that delivery, and that includes the family support delivered through multi-agency teams, and particularly or primarily for under 5s. It also encompassed the youth support and the support for the parents of young people offered through Young Hackney, and then the family support service, which supports families in that older cohort. And further information about those services are provided in paper 6C. And again, just an opportunity to emphasise here that the focus of this review has been on those internal early help services. However, these services are absolutely an aspect of a much wider mosaic of early help offered across Hackney by schools, by the health sector, by the community voluntary sector. And so while the outcomes of this review are focused on, as such, those internal processes and practice that delivers those services, the end of the review will mark the start of a wider piece of early help system transformation, which rightly should be led by the partnership, of which the local authority are a key player, but not the only player. And this will include schools, the police, the health sector, and the voluntary community sector. And that's really looking at how we work towards a whole early help system that is working in a joined up, effective way to provide holistic support for families in Hackney. In terms of the review process, this review has been led by an officer working group and overseen by a members oversight group. And in summary, the work that has led to the completion of this review has included an extensive piece of engagement, which ran for several months and sought feedback from over 200 stakeholders, including staff from within Hackney Council, partners that we work with, and directly talking to parents and young people who access early help services. This was supported by desk-based research and site visits to understand best practice elsewhere, and analysis of the data held by the council, as well as a series of pilot projects to really test opportunities for working in different ways. In terms of what the review told us, and as is always the case with a significant piece of engagement, there's a challenge and a skill in ensuring that we really get the key messages out and respond to those effectively. And one thing it did tell us, the engagement and our analysis, is that there are real strengths to our early help offer in Hackney, and it's absolutely vital that anything that comes out of the review builds on those strengths. And these strengths include, kind of as some of our key highlights, that really wide range of services that we offer through our early help offer in Hackney, that are able to meet a real complex amount of needs. The value in taking a multi-agency approach that is the heart of so much of what we do in terms of early help in Hackney. Really what came through in the engagement was those strong strength-based relationships between our practitioners and the families and young people that they work with, which are absolutely predicated on trust. And then similarly to that, the importance of our practitioners having really high aspirations for young people and families, so that early help ensures that no matter what the starting point is for a child or young person, that we're aiming high for them. And this is something that was really fed back in the engagement. Through the engagement, of course, there were recognition that there are opportunities to do things differently. And we really tried to condense and think about 6 key aspirations for our future early help offer. And these are summarised in the paper, and it's really about kind of from that front to the end, the visible, approachable relationships that are based in the community, really effectively communicated support so that families, so that young people know what help is available and know how to access it. Really the importance of ensuring that through our early help services, we're supporting the needs of the whole family in a really holistic way, and especially supporting parenting capacity. So we're not looking at the child or young person in isolation, but looking at the network with them and working with the parents to build their capacity and build resilience for the future. We recognise the importance in the future our services are and continue to be built on trust and consistent relationships, that we have specific interventions and specialist interventions that are able to meet specific needs and specific ages and stages for children and young people, and that we don't have a kind of one size fits all, but that we're able to flex the interventions we offer to meet the needs directly. And similarly linked to that, ensuring that the interventions we have are constantly led by the outcomes and impact that they will have for children, young people and their families. So based on this learning, based on this analysis, what has been developed is a vision and working principles for Hackney Council's early help offer, and that can be found in paper 6D. And in line with these vision and principles, we have developed a set of short, medium and long-term priorities that will be delivered by Hackney's early help councils from Hackney's early help services from next year, arising from the review. And these absolutely look to deliver on that vision and ensure that services are enacting and living those principles outlined. I won't talk through the the priorities in detail because they're there, and I would welcome questions on it, and Jackie will be able to talk about those priorities in more detail as requested. But what these priorities ultimately equate to are changes to internal practice and internal processes for targeted early help services delivered by Hackney Council. And in delivering these priorities, will really ensure that families and young people are able to access consistent evidence quality of support without delay, without stigma, predicated on consent, and the ongoing service development beyond the review is absolutely led by the needs of children, young people and families in the borough. Deliver these priorities will equate to process and practice changes, but they won't equate to any job losses or changes in job roles or changes in structures, and they will be delivered within current budget frameworks. As I kind of previously noted, these practice changes and the completion of the review equate to maybe what we might consider phase one, which has absolutely been internally focused. And as officers and as with our lead members, we're really clear that this provides the platform for a wider piece of system engagement in how we collectively support children and their families early in Hackney. And we're absolutely committed to delivering that next year. And the delivery of that will kind of be initiated from the establishment of the Strategic Partnership Early Help Group, which will ultimately report into the City and Hackney Safeguarding Children Partnership Board, which will bring together strategic leaders to develop an engagement, develop communication, and then ultimately as the initial guiding piece of work to develop an early health strategy that is shared by that entire partnership and outlines how we want to deliver early help across the piece. Ultimately, what we hope that achieves is to create that infrastructure of really seamless service delivery in the community, which is evidenced and clearly delivers positive outcomes for all our children and families. Just very quickly in terms of next steps, these priorities in the closing of the review will be considered for approval by Cabinet in January. Between now and then, officers will do the preliminary work to ensure the processes and the protocols are in place to deliver these changes from January, subject to approval. And work will also take place from the council's point of view to start to scope and engage with the partnership to ensure that we are able to stand up that early help partnership group from January, who will then be able to lead that system-wide piece of engagement and co-production of the wider early help system. And of course, ongoing member and public scrutiny of early help service development beyond the review will be able to be provided through this commission and also through the Hackney Health and Wellbeing Board. So that's probably my summary. I don't know if Jackie wanted to add anything before I pass, or Councillor Bramble, before I pass back to you, Chair.
I'm fine. I'm just happy to respond to questions as they come up. So thank you, Joshua.
Thank you, Josh. Just to quickly say, building on what Josh was saying, it's built on the principles of a universal strong offer and then thinking about the early help model going forward. And what Josh said is quite right, that coming out of that, the relationship of trust was coming through really strong, which is a real credit to Hackney and the team. And laid alongside that is the work that we do with the voluntary sector. I think it's important to touch on that. The only thing I would also overlay, because Josh is a whiz and is able to articulate this very well, is the work that Hackney Education has done this. I think what's really been a positive move is how Hackney Education has been part of this review and model, which has been the strength-based model we've focused on since we've had the pandemic, and keeping that good practice going forward. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
Just before we go on to the questions, we're just having intermittent problems here in our connection. Can I just ask if members if you could maybe just log off your connections? That might give us some sort of bandwidth here, which will stop the intermittent kind of transmission. So unless you really need it, so that's one suggestion which might improve our connection. Really sorry. I think it's just if you're connected to the Wi-Fi here, that's the main thing. So apologies. That's one suggestion. Okay, sorry.
Is the committee room relying on Hackney Wi-Fi for all, which is an unsecured public network? Oh well. But by all means, if you're on Hackney Wi-Fi, log off and see if it makes any difference.
It's just a suggestion how we might improve
Sure. I would have thought the committee room that we'd be using a more secure network than that, but who knows. So thank you very much to everyone who presented. For the benefit of the people not in the room, as the committee officer has just said, the sound quality is fairly ropey in this room. So if we ask you a question that you've already answered in your presentation, please bear with us. But I can see some members do have questions. So Councillor Sizer.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the work that you've done on this and the presentation this evening. It was a question around the consensual nature that's at the heart of this service, and thinking of how you will reach out to people that maybe need the service but aren't aware of it, or also may have hesitancy about using the service. So maybe groups that are slightly reluctant to engage, how they can be helped to access the service as well, so that you're not just reaching one group of people, one demographic.
Did you want to answer that now, or should we take a group of questions?
I'm happy to answer that now, if that's helpful.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So, as Josh mentioned, we are part of a wider system around early help, and children are seen in a variety of environments. And so, as part of an early help system, we're reliant on our early years settings, our schools, our health visitors, our GPs, and families themselves, recognising when a child may need some additional help. What we're talking about here in this particular review is our targeted early help service, that is an in-house service. So in terms of our MASH, our multi-agency safeguarding hub, we have a part of that now that is dedicated to signposting and helping people access early help. It's in its infancy, and our entire ambition is to be helpful. So it's not about gatekeeping, it's about being helpful and helping families access the support that they need. So part of the work that we will be doing as a system, as part of what our responsibilities are as a local area, as an early help system, is to make sure that everyone is aware of it. Everyone who works within it, that's the voluntary sector, as well as our schools and our families as well, are aware that there is help available. Aware of what kind of help that is. And not all of it has to come from the council, because we know there's a wealth of organisations out there, and what we also have to honour is the amount of early help that's already going on in our schools and other settings through our public health nursing and from our CAM service. So there's a whole range of early help out there for our children and our families. So we will be relying on our system being something that's actively looking for children who need and deserve help. We will be having a particular focus on disproportionality, because what we know is that Black and minority ethnic children aren't always accessing early help services. And we need to address whether that's because they're not being offered it, or because there's an uncertainty about whether to take it up. But we are absolutely committed to addressing disproportionality, and we're absolutely committed to making sure that vulnerable children who need help get access to help.
Thank you very much. I have Jo McLeod, followed by Councillor Troughton.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this report. My question is regarding how you're going to ensure you get feedback from the young people who are being supported through early help. We heard from Joshua about the piece of engagement done with stakeholders, but in the report it says of those 200 odd people, there were 7 young people and 19 parents or carers. It's really important to get the voice of the young people. Could you tell us a little bit more about how they have been involved in the development of this model to date, and how they will be involved in the future as this strategy evolves?
Josh, are you able to answer how this is involved now, and I'm happy to take it forward in the future?
Yes, absolutely, and thank you for that question. I think the first point to note is around the 26 families that we spoke to and parents and the 7 young people. That was a very specific strand of our engagement where we physically sat down with them for an hour and we commissioned a kind of an interviewer to do that piece of really direct engagement and it was specifically young people and families that were already accessing our service. Now, in terms of there was an online survey that was shared, and that's what makes up some of the other 200. And within that, there were parents that completed it. In recognition, it probably didn't capture enough the voice of young people. I think that's something that we are aware of. And I think going forward, and Jackie will talk about this a little bit more, it's about how service improvement is underpinned by those constant feedback loops with young people through the services they are delivering. And I think this review marks the start of that and the recognition that we need to do that effectively and continually, but isn't necessarily predicated totally on the input of young people. So Jackie, I don't know if you want to talk about it a little bit. Yeah.
Chair, but yeah, thank you, Josh. So Chair, if I may come in terms of going forward, what we're really committed to is having a focus on outcomes and understanding. So it's not just about outputs and how many children we see and how many families we serve, but what difference it's made to people's lives. So as part of the principles about this new way of organising ourselves, one of the principles is that we evaluate what the outcomes are for each family or each child at the beginning and at the end of the work, so that we've got some concrete evidence that it's made a difference. Because that's important to us to know that we're achieving that. It's important to children that what we are doing makes a difference to their lives, and also will help us in continually developing and improving the service. So the quality assurance aspect as well as the outcomes aspect is a big piece of what's been built into this.
Thank you. Sorry, because the sound quality is so poor, can I just check that that's the end of your answer?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Councillor Troughton.
Yes, thank you. You've sort of hinted at it already, Jackie, but I just wondered whether you could tell me whether you have really thought about, the key performance indicators rather than just, around outcomes for each individual family or child, but, in terms of general trends. And to give you an example, I was looking at some earlier work on statistics on the SEND budget, and I saw what a large percentage of the SEND budget is spent on social, emotional, and mental health special needs. It's huge when compared to things like autism and physical disabilities. So, is there a way, and would it be your intention to kind of, draw the lines between those kinds of, between those early interventions and those kinds of costs, to the authority over the longer term, say over a 5 or even 10-year term? I know it's a big ask, but, for me, having really tangible outcomes is a really important part of a strategy like this. And if we can't measure them, then we need to look for ways that we can.
Thank you. That's a really good question, and the short answer is absolutely yes. So clearly, data is something that helps us know where we need to point our services, as well as where we know where to step up and where to improve and diversify our offer. So at the moment, requests for early help can land in, for the council's early help service can go anywhere. So they can go from directly into Young Hackney, they can go directly into family support service, they can go directly via a children's centre, and we're not able to capture what the need is, what how long it took for that, from that request for our help to be processed, and how long it's taken for that child to be seen, and how long it takes as well to make a difference in that child's life. So by bringing this all through a single point of access, through the Early Help Hub, we will be able to capture information on what the requests are, and we will be able to therefore look at, have we got, where are they from? Also, what does the performance look like for each individual part of the service? And we will be looking at that with great frequency, which will tell us about, have we got the right resource in the right place? And have we got people on their toes responding in the right way? And what we know, and what's clearly part of the statutory guidance for us, so working together, it says very clearly that by intervening earlier in the child's life, it's actually it's far more cost effective. It's better for the family, but in terms of public money, it's better for us all if we're able to help more families early than just keep it for responding to dire need. We know that when we've done that we've not been helpful in the best way we can be. That's the end of my response, if that's helpful to you in the chamber.
Thank you. Apologies. I mean, I understand that people outside the chamber can hear fine, which is good for you. Councillor Young, please.
Two linked questions, I guess. One follows on from that. So you just mentioned, thank you, in response to Councillor Troughton, that the aim is to be able to. One of the aims is to be able to help more families. I wondered if these proposals are aimed at helping more families or helping families in more depth, and sort of linked to that, I guess. You mentioned that this is to be delivered within the same budget total. Wanted to check whether the aim is to do this cheaper. So is it, you aim to save money here. Is there a kind of target reduction in budget that you're aiming to achieve within this, or is it just to keep the budget, not to grow it?
There are, thank you for the question. There are absolutely no budget savings attendant with this particular piece of work. It's all about better services with what we've got, to organising ourselves better, to have a greater impact for children in Hackney.
I'll just repeat the first part of my question. So is that to help more children or to help children more thoroughly or better, if you see what I mean? So you mentioned helping more people.
So I guess part of the reason for having the Early Help Hub is so that we direct children to the right help at the right time. So it might mean that it's the council statutory services that are doing more, but if we're more aware and working in a more joined up way with other services that are providing early help in Hackney, we'll be able to signpost. Sorry, my dog is barking. We'll be able to signpost families to more appropriate help that meets their needs. So, the whole aim of having it coming through that Early Help Hub is to be helpful, not to gatekeep.
That answers your question, Councillor Young.
Just to add, Chair, if I may, not that I can add much to what Jackie said, it's also about location, and when families go to a location, that there's an array of resources and support where they are. So that, for example, if you've got a family that might need access to multiple intervention support specialists, it's all located in one space rather than them having to travel across borough, for example, for many different things. So that there's something about capturing what people need and bringing that together to make, as Jackie was talking about, it being helpful for the families and children that need those services. And it just makes more sense that they're more aligned.
Thank you, Councillor Bramble. Are there any other questions from members of the Commission or indeed from co-optees? Anyone not in the room? I can't actually see the people not in the room, so I'm reliant on the committee clerk to help me. Martin, can you check for me, please?
I can't see anyone's raised their hand, sorry.
Okay. In that case, thank you very much indeed to the people who presented. Given the AV problems we've been having, if people do have further questions, I'm sure we can take this up in writing outside the meeting. But thank you very much indeed for everyone's contributions this evening on this item. So I'm going to hand the chair back to Councillor Gordon, I understand.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hanson. We're now moving slightly out of sequence onto our final substantive item this evening, which is item 5, the School Estates Strategy. In response to falling school roles and mainstream settings and increased demand for in-borough placements for children with an education and healthcare plan, Hackney Education Service is in the process of developing a school estate strategy. An outline of the emerging strategy has been provided to members, including the rationale for change, together with plans to increase in-borough provision for children with special educational needs, the effective use of the borough's school estate. For this item, I'd like to welcome again Jackie Burke, the Group Director of Children and Education, Annie Gammon, Director of Education, Fran Cox, the Head of High Needs and School Places, and Joe Wilson, the Head of SEND. I understand there's going to be a presentation in relation to this item. So if I could hand over to officers to do their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gordon. I'm going to introduce this and then hand over to Fran and Joe for more detail. This is something we've discussed before at Scrutiny in terms of looking at school places and the rising demands for specialist places for some of our children with complex special educational needs or disabilities who need something beyond a mainstream school place. And indeed, I think in this commission meeting, meetings of this commission, we've been asked about whether there's synergy, and indeed there is synergy there with some places becoming available that can be used in some form for special educational needs places. And I'm pleased to say that we're getting closer to having more detail about that. So Fran and Joe are going to talk to that. So Fran, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Annie. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having us. So we just want to start by giving some context to the issues that we have at hand. And before I jump into the detail, I think it's important to say that these are pan-London issues. They aren't just Hackney issues. We've done a lot of work across London with our partners, both in SEND, but also from a school place planning perspective, to check the wider picture. And we're very much not alone in Hackney in the issues that we're going to talk through today. So essentially, the education estate strategy proposes to bring together two real issues that our schools are facing currently. The first one being a surplus number of places within our primary schools. So as of January last year, we had 505 vacant reception places. So that accounts for around 16% surplus. We've obviously just had the census last month, and we will soon be getting figures that refresh that again. Early data suggests that that surplus has increased as we expect it to. And the GLA, who are the governing body across London when coming to school place planning, are also suggesting will be the case across London. The recommendation in terms of surplus places is that a healthy margin would be around between 5 and 10% surplus places in our primary schools. So obviously 16% is far greater than that. And the impact really on our schools and settings is very, very much that it's harder to balance the budget and it's harder to foresee the forward plan in terms of the numbers of pupils in classes. There's lots of other implications such as greater mobility in the system, children moving around, where there's lots of places in our primary schools, and it creates quite a chaotic environment, or it can do, for some of our schools that are facing this issue. As you would expect, that trend is likely to hit our secondary schools, and you can see here that we've currently got 52 vacant places. Again, a norm for us or a position that we'd like to be in is 0 places. You don't really want a surplus in your secondary schools. We're at 52 at the moment, or we're forecast to be at 52 next September, and that's due to peak with 247 places predicted to be available by September 25. So as you can see, the surpluses that are in our primary settings at the moment will naturally move through to our secondary settings. Why is probably a question that you're asking yourselves. Why are we in this position? There is a number of impacting factors, including Brexit, cost of living, COVID. Families simply are moving out of Hackney and moving out of the London area generally, where they have realised they might be able to work from home and still work in the city. We're also seeing, and we're really drilling down into a lot of the detail with our schools, because this isn't a blanket picture across Hackney. This is Hackney. This is manifesting differently across the borough, but there is lots of rehousing of our families as well, which is impacting these numbers. So this is a real and present issue that we need to deal with as a local authority who has a statutory obligation to manage school places. Second to this, we have the opposite problem, in that we have a significant number of additional children with education, health and care plans. You'll have heard Joe and I and Annie before speak to this issue at Scrutiny, and we know from previous scrutinies that these children are currently having to be educated in independent non-maintained special schools because we simply don't have enough local places for them. And the trends, the forecasts, which we're sense checking all the time, and the numbers are coming through that we're expecting, or that will require a significant number of additional special school places year on year up to 2026. That's a significant pressure on our current special school estate. And it's also important to say that in our post-16 sector, we're a general exporter of children, young people, which is not a very nice phrase, but generally a lot of our post-16 children, young people, leave Hackney and go to provision outside of Hackney, where again, we really want this, and it's interesting just to come in at the end of the last item, local provision within communities for all of our young people in Hackney, no matter whether they have special educational needs or not. Thank you, Joe. So just some local context, and some of you may have seen some of this data before, but this is particularly in regards to where Hackney sits in terms of the percentage of children with EHCPs, and this is just really to reflect some of that data in that last slide. And you can see from the first graph on the left there, the significant rise since 2010 of the numbers of plans. Data from this year is seeing our numbers of plans nearly reaching 3,000. So you can see that trend is certainly moving up as we would expect it to be. Now, conversely to that, you can see here from the data that children and young people on SEND support, so perhaps don't meet the threshold for education, health and care plan, but still have additional needs and will require help and support in a school setting, those numbers have dropped. Now, we don't think this reflects a drop in the numbers of those pupils in school that need this help. But what it perhaps means is schools aren't being well equipped to be able to support children under a SEND support bracket in terms of a graduated response to need, but they are moving straight to applying for education, health and care plans. And we really want to try and intervene there through our graduated response and the widening support of our services to be able to support more strategically with schools to enable them to help earlier at the right time. Thank you, Joe. Again, this graph really looks at the SEND, Hackney SEND position with regards to inner London, England, and our statistical neighbours. And just to pull out a few key facts here, you can see that we have far greater than the national average, London average, or our statistical neighbours when it comes to children with education, health and care plans in mainstream schools. And our schools and settings are certainly telling us this. And I think one school currently, they have around 50% of the children in their reception class are on an education, health and care plan, and that is going to be increasingly the norm as we go forward. And you can also see here that we have far less children and young people in maintained special schools than is the norm across London and England. So that's an interesting reflection of where we're at. And this data is very much underpinning our desire to create more special provision locally, because lastly, you can see here, as we've already spoken at length around with yourselves, we have significantly higher numbers of children in independent non-maintained special schools than is the case across London or indeed nationally. Thank you, Joe. So our strategy, what are we trying to achieve? So essentially, we're proposing to bring those two issues together and suggest that the solution to, or the solutions to tackling those issues should not be looked at in isolation, and we should very much look at our school estate as one and to see how we can make best use of it. So we know we want to create more in-borough special school places. That's absolutely our first priority. Our second two priorities look at how we're going to work with primary schools and secondary schools to manage that surplus, to manage those falling roles, and look at how PANS can be better managed over a period of time. And lastly, it would be, and very topical this week, it would be foolish of us to consider an education-wide estate strategy without considering how we might make better sustainable use of our estate, and considering how a long-term strategy for a sustainable use of our sites is embedded within this strategy as well. And this last, sorry Joe, just one last point. The last thing to note here is we really want to consider equalities across the borough. As I've already suggested, this isn't a blanket issue that's happening. We are seeing pockets where these issues are certainly more impactful, and we are seeing areas of the borough that aren't feeling it yet. Interestingly, the latest data coming through from the census suggests that it is impacting everywhere, but at a different pace. And we are seeing some schools that are more affected by this now, and perhaps some that won't be until the next few years. So we really want to make sure that we consider the local issues at every level to make sure we're not making any blanket proposals across the borough. This isn't a one-size-fits-all strategy. Thanks, Jo. So just drilling down into a little bit more detail, and mindful of the time, we could speak for forever around each of these priorities. Just some highlights here in terms of what we want to achieve through this strategy. We want to create more additional resource provisions. We know that that is a really good model that's used across London nationally to very good outcomes for children. Additional resource provisions are specialist provisions but attached to mainstream schools. So there is great opportunity for inclusion, a great opportunity for expertise being in mainstream schools, and our mainstream school head teachers are very much crying out for that, being able to have that expertise throughout their school. We also know that we need to increase our special provision, and rather than create a new school, which would come under the Free Schools Presumption Act, we're first going to see how we can expand our three current special schools. We've got really good special provision in our special schools. We've got fantastic provision, and new coming into the borough, it's been such a privilege actually to work alongside them in the work they do. So we're working closely with them to see how we might expand their provision, and the need is across all three special schools that we have, maintained special schools that we have. And alongside that, we're really mindful that we have the fourth special school in Side by Side, which is an independent special school, but it caters particularly for the Haredi community. And we're really trying to work closely with them and the wider Orthodox Jewish community to make sure that we are mindful that again, one size doesn't fit all. Our commissioning strategy in relation to special school places for the Orthodox Jewish community must be bespoke to their needs, and it must be included in this strategy to meet their needs. They incorporate over a quarter of our child and young person population, so it's absolutely essential that we get it right for that cohort of children as well. And lastly, but by no means least, we're very mindful of children with social, emotional and mental health difficulties that are within our mainstream schools, currently having to access independent non-maintained special schools. And we're really keen to this strategy to create a robust approach to how we commission places for these pupils. And if you could hop onto the next slide, please, Jo. This is very much going to be aligned with our looking at how we can develop a new vision for our pupil referral unit. Again, perhaps a topic of the evening, getting in there earlier, supporting earlier to try and prevent exclusion where possible, but really recognising that the expertise of the teachers and the workforce that sit within a pupil referral unit are going to be very similar to those that are supporting children who need a long-term school placement that might have social, emotional and mental health difficulties. So again, not trying to look at those two issues in isolation, but try and find a way to bring that strategy together. Thanks, Jo. So in relation to priorities 2 and 3 in our falling school roles, we know that we need to remove a significant number of school places from the primary sector, and we need to move to nearer 10%. We are mindful that some of the impacting factors on the surplus places, namely Brexit and COVID, are situations that 3 years ago none of us thought we would be here, and so we are very much in uncharted territory in how this is going to play out in the medium and long term. So the GLA are working very closely with local authorities to keep a view and keep an eye on these numbers of places, because in terms of population behaviour, we don't really know what's going to happen. So we're very much not jumping straight down to the 5%, but we're taking things slowly and thinking how we can reduce to 10% in the short term. And that equates to around 450 primary school places. We've already made moves last year, because there's a long lead in when it comes to PAN reductions within maintained schools. 135 places have already been removed from the system through PAN reductions. They will come into effect from September 22. And through our normal admissions cycle, we're having conversations with schools where they're choosing to reduce their PANs to align better with the numbers of pupils that are coming through their system. And as mentioned previously, we're also drilling down into the detail within our neighbourhoods, with our head teachers, to really understand what is going on in each neighbourhood, to really understand what the impacting factors are for our families, what's the decision making around what schools they're choosing, to gain intelligence. Data is one thing, but intelligence on the ground from those that are working most closely with our families in schools and settings is absolutely essential to make sure that this strategy is correct. Thanks, Jo. And lastly, as mentioned, we want to make sure that we do a wide-scale review of our education estate. I think there's nothing going to be proposed in this strategy that suggests that we're going to have so many surplus places we need to sell off our school sites. Absolutely not. We're really clear that our education estate is something to be proud of, but we do need to make best use of it to meet the current needs of our population. So we need to protect all of our education sites for future use. So we need to think of clever ways whilst we might use them and make good use of them, but being mindful that in 10 years' time, who knows what the population of Hackney and London might do, and we might have call for them to be mainstream school places again. So we're really trying to think long term when it comes here and not be reactionary in any way. And we're trying to gain a better understanding of the environmental sustainability within the estate as well. We have a beautiful mix of Victorian buildings, which come with their own maintenance issues, and BSF schools, and modern, really, really fantastic, beautifully designed schools. But they all come with, as you would expect, conditions and maintenance issues. So we're trying to do a full review of that whilst going through the strategy to make sure that we've got that long-term capital investment plan. Thank you, Jo. So the timeline, just in a little bit further detail, and you'll have this in your papers, so I won't talk through in great detail, but the headlines being that we would seek to bring this high-level strategy to Cabinet in January for agreement in principle to the proposed ways forward. And there'll be a business case underpinning the strategy in terms of budget allocation. As you would expect, the increase in local send places will require capital investment, and there's currently an investor safe business case that we're building to evidence why local school places actually provide better value for money than costly out of borough places that require transportation to them. There'll also be a period of feasibility where we look at schools that have expressed interest in running ARPs. We look at how we might expand our special schools, and we really drill down into the best value options for that before coming back to Cabinet in March for formal ratification of the implementation plan for the send priority within the strategy. There's then a number of statutory processes that we need to go through when making any significant alteration to send provision. And so we'll go through that through the summer term, and then commencing in September, we will start the send expansion programme. Now, based on some of the expressions of interest that we've already received, we're hopeful that there could be some provision where a set of classrooms in a mainstream school might be refurbed or repurposed for an ARP, for example. That provision might come online quite quickly, and then, as you'd expect, some projects will naturally take longer. And so throughout next academic year, and really kicking off properly in September 23, we would expect the wider scale of additional local send places to be ready and able to be utilised by our children and young people. Thank you, Jo. And the next one, please. So just touching a little bit more on our Investor Save, as mentioned then, I think it's probably well evidenced through the work that Scrutiny have supported us with around independent non-maintained special schools that there's greater value for money and it's better for the children and young people if they go to school locally. But we're really making sure that we've got a robust business case to underpin that. And it will look at cost comparisons for sending children out, as you would expect, or like looking after them much closer to home. And then we know that we've got some capital investment through the Send Basic Need Grant, Send Capital Grant and our Basic Need Grant, sorry. And we know that we will likely need addition to that. So we'll be really thinking about what funding sources might be needed to create this or make this strategy real. And all that detail will be brought to Cabinet in January. Thanks, Joe. So what are we doing in the meantime? So we're very much listening and speaking to all of our stakeholders, as you'd expect. So we're both internally within the Hackney Council, within our schools and settings, speaking to our partners in health, and speaking to our partners in the diocese, who govern a lot of our estate in our voluntary aid schools, and then also speaking with our early years colleagues, and speaking with residents and speaking with families and speaking with young people themselves. It's really, really important that we hear their voice through this strategy. Thanks, Joe. We're also, as you would expect, and speaking with you all tonight as part of that, we're really looking for our political leadership in terms of getting a real sense of what elected members are feeling on the ground, what they're picking up from their communities. And we're doing, as you would expect, due diligence and appropriate processes internally within Hackney Council's executive leadership. We're also making sure that we manage communications. There are some schools and settings that are feeling this in a far greater and real way now than those that will over the coming months and years. And we're just really making sure that we have a close working relationship with our schools to make sure that we are supporting them appropriately and making sure that they do not feel alone in this issue. Joe. So at January, just to conclude, we will be taking the high-level strategy paper. I think it's important to note there that there won't be any named proposals in that strategy paper. We won't be saying we're going to build an ARP here or there. It will be principles. It will be seeking Cabinet's approval for the strategic direction as outlined tonight. And we will also be seeking approval for a budget envelope, because we can't really drill into the detail of what we might deliver until we have some understanding of what capital investment we might be able to use to underpin the strategy. Thank you all. That's it from us. So I'll hand over to you, Chair, in terms of questions.
Thanks very much, Fran, for your really informative presentation. I mean, I'm sure we all welcome, Hackney's ambition to provide, to educate far more of our children in maintained settings, particularly our most vulnerable children in maintained settings within their home borough. So I'm sure that's something the Commission broadly welcomes. I'm sure we'll also have questions. I mean, obviously we are still struggling with sound, as we have been throughout this meeting. So I'm afraid I think there may be questions coming to you in a written form after the meeting if we don't get to all the points that members want to raise. I'll start off quickly. So I think actually, sorry, Councillor Bramble, I think you may want to say something before we start questions. Thank you.
Just quickly, Chair, I know the main purpose of the presentation was to talk about SEM provision and bringing that in-house and the benefits of that. But just to say at the beginning, when Fran touched upon why there was some vacancies across the school estate, and just wanted to highlight some points of it anecdotally, not scientific evidence, of course, Chair, why some of that might have happened. I think free schools, not consulting with the council and been able to set up, has had an impact on places. The cap on the benefits, housing benefits, has had an impact on movement as well. Brexit has had an impact, and the last thing that I would say as well is, for want of a better word, lifestyle choice a chair where people absolutely love living in Hackney, but actually they're faced with possibly having a flat and a nice balcony and offsetting living outside of London and having a 3-bedroom house, 2-bedroom house and a garden. So those things combined, Chair, is why we have that kind of displacement across the piece. And it's not just in Hackney, that's pan-London and also outside. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bramble. And obviously, Councillor Woodley, if you want to come in now or later, just let me know. So, yeah, I was just going to maybe start off with a question there. I know that other members will have some as well. I think this is a question for Fran. I mean, obviously, you've described how you're surveying the school estate and also the need in terms of educational provision. How will those decisions be made? Are you going to be looking at settings? How will the decisions be made? Will it be the settings where there is, you know, surplus capacity, or will you be able to take a more sort of strategic approach and look for the sort of skills and provision that those schools can provide, and where there's a particular need in our community for those sort of services? And how far will you be able to co-design that direction of travel with parents and, you know, other user groups? And secondly, I know that it's early stages in relation to this, but I'm sure, as everyone's aware, we you know, we take our budget scrutiny function very seriously in this commission. I know that you're still looking at numbers, but if you could give us any sort of indication at all in terms of capital and other investment and the revenue costs of this provision, that would be really helpful. Thank you. I don't know whether any of the members want to ask something at the moment. You can take two together. I saw Councillor Selman first, then.
Thanks, Councillor Gordon. Also, just before I contribute, Councillor Young and I were just conferring that we should also probably have flagged at the outset that we recently joined Councillor Woodley and Councillor Palace on a ward councillor visit to Side by Side, just mentioning that for completeness. But just on the reference to the commissioning strategy in relation to the Orthodox Jewish community, I was just interested in what we have done to date or will be doing to engage and capture the voice of Orthodox Jewish parents and ideally young people about their aspirations and needs. And just linked to that as well, I'd just be really keen to understand between that strategy and the other strategy as well, what the balance we think within that will be between ARP independent settings and what that balance would look like across those strategies. Thanks.
Okay, I think that's probably enough for one round of questions, Fran, so I'll take other questions a different round. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. So in relation to how decisions will be made in terms of the ARP provision and the expansion, we have a really good, inherited a really good assessment methodology that you would expect includes, as you've suggested, a more strategic approach. So we've asked schools to submit expressions of interest, and we had a really good response rate. And their responses were measured alongside, as you say, the locality, the geography, whether they've got physical space. And I think that is, we're very mindful of heavily stressing the value for money in this strategy that we want to deliver, and trying to reduce our capital spend as much as possible, because we know that we've got a lot to do. So ability to create the space in a cost-effective way was absolutely one of the factors, but also their ability to their local provision anyway, their ethos, their inclusivity as a school, all of those elements were absolutely taken into case, and it's quite a structured scoring mechanism that we've gone through with a panel of colleagues internally. We're also, as you rightly know, that's kind of the first step. The second step is really to drill down into the detail with the potential hosts around how we might co-design with them and with parents and with young people around what that looks like. And we're really making sure we're working closely with HIP, who are being fantastic supports to us in trying to gain the understanding and the feedback from our communities, our parent carer communities, but also our young people. We had a fantastic SEND relaunch event, and my favourite bit of it was hearing the voice of the young person through it. From all aspects of our SEND community, both mainstream school right the way through to special school and AP provision as well. So that's absolutely integral and essential in our decision making. We'll also, as noted on the timeline, commission a viability assessment of the options as well, just to sense check what that might look like. It might be a fantastic idea for all the right reasons, but it might cost a huge amount of money, and it just wouldn't be best use of public funds to do that. So in answer to your question around the investment, I think it's too early a stage at the moment to be able to give councillors any real tangible data on that. A lot of hard work is being done by our finance colleagues in the background, but I think one figure which we have quoted before here at Scrutiny and is very well evidenced is that to place a child in an independent non-maintained special school costs around £45,000 per pupil, and to place in one of our local special schools, well, that you're looking at less than around £10,000 less per child, depending on type of need, depending on amount of top-up required. So it's well evidenced that to place in our local provision is more cost effective, and that's not factoring in cost of transport as well. In relation to Councillor Selman's question around the Orthodox Jewish community, I'm so pleased you got to visit side by side. It was my first visit actually when I arrived in Hackney. I think Joe and I visited my first week, and what an amazing group of educators that are working in really difficult circumstances currently in the provision that they're in. But so inclusive and actually a real model that I think we can adopt more widely in Hackney around this side-by-side notion, where you have children without additional needs learning and playing and being educated alongside children with additional needs. And I think we're very much strategically wanting to include Gerald side by side and the community that he represents as part of our strategic intent, just to make sure that we really capture and understand the needs of that community. So we're working in terms of trying to glean the voice of the community as a wider, and that includes the young people themselves and parents. We're working and we're trying to build relationships with community partners. So I spoke with Step by Step today to try and get an understanding of the children and the families they're working with. And we're trying to go and visit and meet families in settings where as much as we can to try and get that understanding. What we know is that in terms of what the strategy might look like, we have Side by Side, who are a fantastic example of an independent school who provide excellent value for money, but also are Ofsted Good registered setting, which is great. The independent schools that we're working with, they would rightly say, and Joe started to be part of both the female Senko Forum and the male Senko Forum for the community. They know that they need better expertise in SEND throughout their independent school settings, and they're really open to it, and they're really open to working with us. So we're really excited about that possibility, and I think Joe's been working quite closely with them on looking what that could look like. Could we set up an ARP within the independent sector, supported by Side as an Ofsted Good registered setting? So there are a number of options, and we're not rushing forward. Again, we want to make sure that we've got a really good opportunity to do something quite exciting here, and we want to make sure that we do it well and take our time to understand what the best use of our strategic resource is. I don't know if you want to say anything, Councillor Woodley.
I actually just wanted to land that point with you, Fran. I don't think I can understate how welcome this kind of moment of change is across the head teachers at the schools. At the relaunch conference, that came across very clearly, that we have recognised what needs to change and that it needs to happen quickly. But we've also recognised really sensible ways of doing it. So it's a multi-pronged approach. So we're looking at the ARPs, the additional resource provisions. We're looking at those expansions of sites that we know are excellent. We have such good representation, I guess, from our special schools and our special school leaders. I've heard so many good things from the Haredi community directly in terms of the kind of the opening up of relationship there. They're so impressed, I think, by Fran and Joe and the kind of serious conversations. I don't think a year ago they would have accepted that they needed that specialist advice actually in quite the same way as they do now. And it's lovely because, that warmth and that openness can only help us across the broader education sector. And I think the kind of question around the commissioning strategy for specialist SEMH places is something that it might be useful to expand on in more detail in another time, because this is quite a complex area. It's quite challenging for us to resolve. It's a lot of that work is done out of Borough. to bring it in borough will take quite a lot of work, and I wouldn't want to skip over that point too much. So I would suggest that Scrutiny look at that again in future. And again, you've heard me say it before, this work was able to happen as quickly as it has because we did a year of sort of local area assessment prior to this, which meant that we could come in with two confident leaders in Fran and Joe and actually take some action. And I think so far, everybody seems to be very receptive to that. So I hope that offers some assurance to Scrutiny.
Thank you very much. I've got Joe McLeod. Is anyone else? And Councillor Garcia, thank you.
Thank you. I also wanted to just echo how very welcome this ambitious strategy is. I had a specific question really around the ambition to deliver 336 additional places by 2023. We're talking about some combination of ARPs. I don't know how many pupils you would envisage in each of those, but on average, they seem to be about 10 pupils per setting, which would account for roughly 40 places. That still leaves approximately 200 places. I wonder if you are able yet to speak in a little bit more detail about what breakdown you envisage these places, what breakdown will be in ARPs, what breakdown will be in extensions of special schools, and is it feasible to deliver these places by 2023? And I suppose connected to that, to what extent, how far along are you in your strategic analysis, which we've touched on, about what exact needs, where the gaps are? Are we simply looking at more places in our existing special schools for pupils with similar profiles, or are we talking about whole new provision, for example, for academically able autistic young people who currently fall between the gaps between mainstream and special schools? And what proportion do those children form of the whole cohort that we're looking at? Thank you.
Yeah, so my question is, how have the local free special schools been engaged so far, and what are their views about expanding provision if appropriate local sites can be found?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Joe, for supporting us as well in the way that you have done over the past 6 months, and making sure that we are really hearing what's happening out there for our children and young people. I think that in terms of it is a great ambition. The need is urgent, both from a financial perspective, but also because it's the right thing to do to offer children places locally. And every time Joe and I have to make a decision to place a child that could be educated locally in and out of borough provision, it breaks our heart a little bit, because it's not the right thing for the child. And so we have got a sense of urgency in what we need to deliver. As Councillor Withey's rightly noted, we benefit from a year of analysis, data analysis, really trying to understand what our need is and where it is. So in answer to your question, we are intending, and this will all be ratified through the feasibility process, because there's what we need and then what we can do, to expand each of our special schools by approximately 50 places. And then the ARPs that we're looking to deliver will be nearer 24 places where possible. So we do have an understanding of the extent that we need to do it. So that number is built up from the ARPs, special schools, and the commissioning element that we want to include in there. So we might, for example, choose as part of our SCMH strategy to commission X number of places from a provider. But I think it's very much, we know it's ambition, and I think just going back to my point on the timeline, some of those places will be online far earlier than 2023. Some of them simply will take longer, and that will all be dependent on the build solution, essentially, or the solution around that. We are thinking, and we are prioritising or making sure that we give good attention to options that will deliver places sooner rather than later, because that's going to provide us with better value for money. In terms of our strategic analysis of what we need, The simple answer is more of the same. If you look at where our spend is, we are spending across the board, both within our mainstream schools, within our ARPs, within our special schools. We know that the need is particularly around autism, as you would expect. That's our greatest increase in need. So we're thinking about ARPs both in primary and secondary in relation to autism. Also with children or more young people in secondary school age with MLD, so moderate learning difficulties. This strategy is very much to be seen as part of the wider SEND improvement strategy. It's not as simple as just creating new places. We have to work better and more innovatively with our maintained schools to enable them to help children to belong in mainstream school settings. The Code of Practice is quite clear on that. But MLD is a good example where we want to expand our fantastic provision in Stormont House, but we also want to ask, how can Stormont House outreach better into our mainstream schools to allow them to look after children with moderate learning difficulties in a better and different way? And I think we're really looking at the fantastic work that's been undertaken around the diverse curriculum and asking ourselves, could we do something similar for young people with moderate learning difficulties? Is there a different curriculum offer that we need to offer within our mainstream schools? Because there is a significant proportion of the school community that have those issues. And then in relation to the last question, I'm sorry, I didn't hear completely. It was around local free special schools and how we're engaging with them in terms of the strategy. Is that correct?
I think it was our three special schools.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. I wondered. So we've had a fantastic workshop a couple of weeks ago with our 4 special schools, because we include side by side, and we are really trying to drill down into what their offer is, making sure it's clear and visible for our families that we understand it. New into the borough, I had to go and visit and really speak with them and meet the children and young people before I really understood what their offer was. So we're looking at how we can make their offer clearer for our families. And really through that workshop, we really began to understand what the gaps were. And ICBA, for example, has 3 pathways, and really it's only one of those pathways within that school, but there is an urgent need for places for. So it's absolutely essential that we don't just blanket and do something like a quick fix here, but we have to drill down into the detail of what's needed. So we're working closely with them. Joe and I meet with our special school heads 2 weekly to make sure that we are working closely with them, and they're essential. They're an essential partner in developing this. And as said at the start, they are delivering good and outstanding education for our children at the moment, and they're absolutely essential, not only to expanding that, but supporting our mainstream schools to do more with what they have as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fran. And I've got a question from Councillor Hanson.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Chair. I was actually asking about the mainstream provision when we were told we should aim for essentially 0 headroom, which seems very low if you think that people might move into the borough during the course of the year. But is that on the assumption that more people will move out of the borough during the year than will move in? Or, I mean, students of secondary school age, I mean, by people here.
Very much, Councillor Hanson. I'll just add one more question really about the expanding role of New Regent's College, which in these proposals is going to have some quite significant changes. And I just really wanted to sort of maybe a little bit more detail about how this is going to sort of intersect with New Regent's College's current role as the pupil referral unit, and also in relation to their role in commissioning provision for children that are referred to them, and how those 2 roles are going to fit together, and also, you know, the focus on, you know, whether how New Regent's College is going to operate in future, whether it's going to be more a sort of provision where children provided for a short period of time and then reintegrated. Just a little bit more detail really about how all of that's going to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So in terms of our secondary surplus, the rationale behind, and the GLA, this is GLA guidance around the, you know, 0% surplus is mainly based on the fact that because the children within the secondary sector are largely already in our primary sector, we can much better track and who's coming through the system. And also secondary children can travel, so that there's allowing for greater mobility across the borough. So that's why that recommendation is as it is. Whereas in primary sector, generally your primary schools are for your local community, and we need to be able to make sure that there is space for young children to be able to access a school very local to them. Whereas for secondary, it's they can travel. In relation to New Regent's College, they're absolutely a key partner in this. And currently we hold an SLA with them, which commissions them as our pupil referral unit, but they do offer a lot more than that. And they have over the course of the years developed alternative offers that they broker with schools. And I think what we want to do as a commissioner and local authority is better make use of that to ensure that it's offered widely and equitably across all of our schools and settings, and include that within our SLA. So their offer, it's proposed, Councillor Gordon, would become wider, would include early help offers such as partnership placements, as well as placements as a consequence of permanent exclusion. It'd also be seeking to develop with them, which they do already do, bespoke project placements whereby we might have, and Joe mentioned earlier, for example, children that are very academically able but due to anxiety not accessing mainstream school. So there might be offers where a cohort of young people experiencing the same difficulties might be educated together. Reintegration back into mainstream school is absolutely included in some of those pathways, particularly in Key Stage 3 and often in Key Stage 4 as well. And we also want to make sure that we are working more closely with them around the commissioning of alternative provision as well, and making sure that we develop better and more robust systems of quality assurance for alternative providers, working in partnership with New Regents. But they're very much, we want to very much work with them to develop this. And in terms of our children with SEMH as well, they've got some great expertise there that we're not currently utilising in terms of our children with education, health and care plans, and we want to make sure that we do that, and we really map and scope with them what that might look like. In terms of timescales in relation to that, we're really scoping that and thinking that through ahead of Easter, before potentially the SLA will be renewed in April to reflect any changes, and that will be starting to roll out then from September next year. But we're consulting with school settings and families, and we will be over the next few months, just about how that looks and what that looks like.
Thanks very much, Fran. Are there any further questions to the Commission? I think Joe and then Shabnam.
Hello, I just wanted to ask about post-16 provision, which has been highlighted as an area of priority, and how this school estate strategy is going to contribute to improving a range of options for young people post-16.
That was actually the question I was going to ask as well, but I will ask this. For pupils with EHCPs, what provision is being made to ensure that schools deliver to the specifications set out in the EHCPs, but also for pupils that kind of don't meet the criteria of EHCPs? I mean, it was noted that there's a fall in that, which is really quite alarming, to be honest. To what extent are parents being engaged in that, and how is that being mapped in terms of projecting needs in the future? Because I know that the work has been done for EHCPs to an extent, but to what extent has this particular cohort been included in that? Because there doesn't seem to be very much mention of that.
Thank you. I'll answer the first question, if that's okay, and then I'll hand over to Joe to pick up the second one. Post-16 provision, we are intending to do a provision map, essentially, of what we currently have, and that will evidence and identify what we already know is that there are gaps within our provision. We're really working closely with our mainstream secondary schools as well to consider how we can provide more inclusive sixth form options, level 1, level 2 courses, and we've had some really good conversations with some of our secondary schools. Really, they know there's a need, really keen to do that. And again, we're going to be working alongside Stormont House and our other special schools to look at those pathways to employment, pathways into post-19 training as appropriate. So we're really trying to bring everything together in this strategy, and this completely aligns with our SEND strategy, as you would hope. And one of our priorities within the SEND strategy is preparing for adulthood. We know that we've got a lot of work to do around that, and it's difficult, but it's absolutely essential that we get it right. So the element of this strategy will simply seek to address the need and do that provision mapping to underpin a lot of the work in the SEND strategy. I'm going to hand over to Joe around the mainstream school issue. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Fran. So I think as part of the answer to the question, the data around children who are on SEND support level comes from the school census, which we get every October. That gives us really good information at a school level about different areas of need and where children are. So whether it's a certain portion of children with autism or children with SEMH that we were talking about previously. I think what can happen sometimes in the SEND system is lots and lots of resources are diverted to children on EHC plans, so children at the statutory end of the process. But what's equally as important is all those children and young people who are at the SEND support level. So you quite rightly ask about how that's monitored and tracked and how we look at progress there. I think the key for us is that those children and young people get the right support at the right time, that schools are skilled and trained in delivering support before getting to the level of an EHC plan. So making sure things such as quality first teaching are in place, making sure that schools know how to get resources and how to access them as well. There is a monitoring role there for the local authority. So we do lots of training with our Timecodes, for example. When we're going into schools, we meet with Timecodes and we look at progress of all children in a certain school that might be on the SEND register. So we are checking all the time. We are speaking to our schools to make sure that those children and young people are making good progress. We can do more here for those children and young people. We've just launched the graduated response in Hackney. So that's all about what schools should be doing before getting to the statutory level. We're going to go through quite a long period now of embedding that practice, making sure that there's some uniform practice across different settings in Hackney. But we're hoping that will really help make sure that children and people make really good outcomes before getting to the EHC level.
Thank you. I don't know if you've got any follow-ups to those questions. Joe, yeah.
I just wanted to drill down a little bit more on the EHCP question, which you didn't quite address. I completely support all you're saying about the need to put as many resources as possible into SEND support before reaching statutory support level. But once an EHCP plan is being sought and has been assessed to be necessary, I think what often happens is that recommendations are written into a report in a rather pragmatic way according to what they think is can be delivered pragmatically by the school that's named in the provision, rather than the needs of the child being written in and then the school having to find a way to deliver that. And there's obviously a huge issue around resources. Schools don't have enough resources to put all of the provision in place. So I suppose there's a bigger question around how in this plan is the council able to better support schools to deliver provision which is really based around the needs of the child, not based around what a school is able to deliver for that child.
Thanks very much, Joan. Maybe if I could just slightly develop that point in terms of provision in relation to SEND support, which is obviously less structured, less a sort of accountable offer as well. And it would be, I think, in terms of developing a strategy, I think we would really welcome, some further work in relation to the offer that's made to the vast majority of our special educational needs children who are in receipt of SEND support. So I don't know, Joe, whether you can sort of comment on that. I mean, obviously it's a complex issue, but any feedback, both those questions would be really welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you. I think coming back to the first point, when we're looking at children's needs as part of an EHC plan, we look at the need, we look at the provision, and we look at the outcome. So when we're looking at placing children in the setting, we decide if that setting can meet the needs that are in the plan. We have lots of children who get bespoke offers, so they might be attending a certain school, for example, and they might need a certain level of support that the school doesn't normally provide for. So in those instances, we'll make sure that the school has the resources to buy in whatever is needed. It's not a perfect system. So when we're developing provision, we develop provision looking at a range of needs, but looking at a specific level of need. So for instance, if we're looking at autism, we'll look at what most children on that continuum of need might need. And there are always children who that doesn't work for, who then we have to look at what the offer might be for those children and young people. But coming back to the second point, yes, it is right that we're looking at children on SEND support in more detail and looking at the provision that's available for them. What we've done as part of this strategy is we've looked at the main areas of need coming through the system. So we know, for instance, that 25% of our children and young people have a diagnosis of autism. We all know that autism is a big continuum of needs, so there's different forms of need within that spectrum. But what we're trying to do is to make sure that we have provision that's meeting the highest level of need to start with. And then once we've got that, we can start to work back through to what else might be needed. I think it's important to say as well that when we're looking at specialist provision in Hackney, our current ARPs and resource bases have developed quite organically over a period of time, which is quite right, and that's happened in most local areas. But we're really taking stock at the moment. So we're reviewing those provisions to see what's working, what's not working, before we start to build more. And we're happy to bring back further detail on that when we get there.
Thank you very much. I can't see any other hands from Commission members, either in the chamber or virtually. So I think one final question from me. We're obviously, in the run-up to COP26 and its priority across scrutiny and across the council in relation to our to obtaining our net zero targets. I noticed in the presentation that there's an aspiration to gain a better understanding of environmental sustainability within the school estate. It's maybe really a comment rather than a question. I hope that we're going to do a little bit better than that, because obviously there's a big contribution made by our built environment, both the maintenance and energy consumption of our current existing buildings, and also in relation to the construction of any possible other buildings. I'm really seeking reassurances that this is going to be looked at in considerable detail in relation to the contribution of our school estate to the council's overall target towards net zero, and also there's going to be really significant working together across the different directorates in relation to our council's climate action plan. Thank you. So I don't know whether I can have those reassurances that I'm seeking.
Yeah, certainly, Councillor Gordon. We're working closely with our property team, as you would expect and hope, and the wider council teams that are looking at our council estate as well, to make sure that we absolutely are being very mindful of that target around net zero, and also how we can look at our existing estate, as well as when we're delivering or developing new aspects of the estate, how that could absolutely be top of our agenda when thinking and commissioning consultants and build solutions. So it absolutely is, and I think, as you would expect, this strategy has been a fantastic way to work across council as well, because we're touching a number of different council departments in what we're intending to do, and I think that would be a good point to revisit, perhaps at future meetings, around drilling into that detail, and we can ask our property colleagues who are far more knowledgeable about the area than I am. I don't want to speak behalf of my other education colleagues, to provide a bit more meat on the bones about how we're going to do that, and certainly we can feed that back to them.
Thanks very much. So I think we're now going to draw that item to a close. And thank you very much for attending. And I think members may take up the opportunity of sending in any additional questions in writing. And obviously, this is also, a strategy we're going to keep paying close attention to this commission in future. But thank you very much for the presentation this evening. So I'll now move on to agenda item 7, which is the work programme. I don't know whether members have had an opportunity to consider. So the next meeting in December is going to be, we're going to welcome back Councillor Woodley for her question and answers. And we're going to have the Children and Families Service annual report. We're going to be collating questions for Councillor Woodley this week. And then in January 2022, there's going to be a safeguarding focus meeting. So, I mean, obviously, in December, we're going to be presenting our review of the outcomes, our very long-standing and very significant review in relation to the outcomes of children who've been excluded from school. So I don't know whether there's any comments to the work programme or whether members just want to note it. Noted. So, and then item 8 is the minutes of the previous meeting. I don't know whether there's any comments. I don't think there's any matters arise. There's one action arising for the minutes, a request for further information from Tower Hamlets Youth Justice Service. This data has been provided by officers and has been sent round to members of the Commission. Can members agree the minutes? Thank you. Item 9, any other business? Date of the next meeting, 6th of December. I'll now declare the meeting closed, and I really do apologise to everybody who's given their time this evening. Apologies there. Now, you've got any other business?
Yeah, under any other business, thank you, Chair. I was at the meeting of the 10th of the 6th of October, and I've just realized that my name has not been recorded as an attendee. I attended virtually.
Thank you very much for raising that, and I'm sure we'll make suitable arrangements. And it's obviously very important your attendance has been recorded. I also want to apologise to everyone who's given their time this evening in relation to the sound quality in this chamber, and I think it's something that we are going to be raising as, in every direction possible to try and improve the experience of scrutiny meetings, both for members attending, officers and for the public. Thank you very much. So I'll now declare the meeting closed.
Thank you, Chair.